All right, maybe we'll start. The attendees will join in. Um, Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on transforming nursing education with LT, insights from Otago Polytechnic and Wintec in New Zealand. I'm Deepika, Scientific Support Specialist at ADI based in Sydney, and I'll be moderating this event. Before we move ahead, I'd like to give a brief overview of AD Instruments. At AD Instruments, we create industry-leading software and hardware tools for life science researchers and educators. For educators specifically, LT, along with education kits, is one of our extraordinary offerings. So, what is LT? LT is our online learning platform with ready to use content for life sciences, nursing, medical, and veterinary courses. LT is used in over 250 institutions globally and comes with over 500 interactive and fully customizable lessons and labs for active learning, whether you're teaching in the lab or remotely. Um, Today's session is amazing if you run labs or teach. Using our content, software, and hardware, we have noticed improved efficiency, increased student engagement, improved results in theory and clinical practice, and increased student pass rates as well. Best part about those platform is that it's completely adaptable if you want to make your own content or edit the existing ones. So, the key focus in today's webinar is teaching nursing using LT. I would like to introduce the hardware that would help teaching immensely. Our range of plug-and-play sensors connect directly through to LT through a USB connection on both your Windows and Mac OS computer. This creates active engagement and helps students to quickly grasp and understand core physiological concepts in LT's labs. I also want to quickly show the built-in ADI nursing content that we have. LT's collection is a complete curriculum of ready-to-use lessons and labs. You can see the available topics on screen here. We have a variety of classes designed for immersive nursing and clinical skills. You should be able to see this on our website as well. Um, and in addition to that, we also have a patient case library with 30 plus real patient case studies, reflective learning, and a focus of clinical skills. LT helps you to engage nursing students and prepare them for the healthcare environment. We have built this library with actual cases based around a real patient's experience, including initial presentation, patient history, and clinical summary. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers, Ricci and Kimberly. Ricci is a principal lecturer in biosciences at Wintec, where she has taught human anatomy and physiology for over 2 decades. She has designed and coordinated a wide range of courses, including level 4 bridging and level 5 bioscience courses for nursing, midwifery, and physiotherapy. She recently developed content for Tepukenga's Unified Bachelor of Nursing as well. And our second speaker is Kimberly, who's a senior lecturer at Otago Polytechnic. She has taught and developed anatomy, physiology, and pathophysiology courses across various programs, including nursing, midwifery, occupational therapy, and beauty therapy. She is currently teaching in the Bachelor of Nursing and Enrolled Nursing programs. Um, that's my introduction. And Ricky, why don't you take over?
Kia ora koutou. I'm Ricci Wesselink. I'm based at Wintec in Hamilton, New Zealand. I'm going to present our experience using LT that you'll hear me also call Kura Cloud over the last, how long? About the last 7 years. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, so we're starting with these questions about our history of use. So I'm working in the LT platform. Again, you'll hear me refer to it as both LT and Kura Cloud. Those are the terms that we use here. So we started, our experience really stretches back to 1999, where one of our researchers and current staff members, Kevin Stewart, started using MacLab for practical experiments and research. Lab Tutor was developed in 2012. Well, it was being used in 2012 in our midwifery and lab classes. And then the Power Labs that Deepika showed earlier were being used between 2010 and 2024 to offer students practical experiences linked to the theory that they're learning, where they could learn from making recordings from themselves. Now, since 2017, we've been using LT Kura Cloud. We have written and revised lessons. So our team has a health science team on anatomy and physiology, biochemistry, genetics, microbiology, pharmacology, and pathophysiology. At the time that we started needing these lessons or choosing to use them, there weren't lessons on all of the topics that we needed available through ADI. So we had to write them ourselves, and we found the platform very easy to use and very easy to modify as we got feedback from students about how we could do it better, and as we learned ourselves about how to do that. There are also lessons, as Deepika said, that are written by ADI about it on a range of different topics, so ready to go and easily modified. Now, at WinTech in 2004, we're using LT in 23 different courses, so both bioscience and clinical courses, and we have 928 students currently using it in a variety of different courses, as you can see, from level 4 courses, enrolled nursing, bridging courses in the Bachelor of Nursing through years 1, 2, and 3, and our Masters of Nursing Science, our Bachelor of Midwifery, Bachelor of Physiotherapy also. Okay, so prior to 2017, we were teaching fairly traditionally. For us, that meant that our students attended a 2-hour lecture, followed by a 2-hour lab, and then they had 1 hour's homework that was set for them. So that was fairly traditional. And then what happened at the end of 2016 was a combination of factors. So first, we had student feedback asking for changes in the way that we facilitated their learning. We had course academic results that were not to be admired and needed to be addressed. And there was an availability of new technology and exposure to new approaches in education. So in semester 2, 2016, we gave our students a survey and asked, so this is our semester 2 students, asking how the course could be improved. And what they told us was this, that they wanted more feedback on homework, more interactive online lessons, more practice exams and questions so that they could get feedback about how they were learning and whether they were on the right track. They wanted more pictures and references. They wanted less surplus information. And they really valued time with tutors to explain and break down content further. They wanted us to get alongside them rather than be the sage on the stage. They wanted more variety in content, and not just, some of them were saying, we don't all learn the same way. Can you give us variety? And they wanted less wordy lectures. They wanted to know exactly what they needed to know and cut the fat, please, they were saying. So at that time, our pass rate for that whole year, 2016, so this is looking at 2 cohorts, 236 students, the pass rate was 74%. So that means that 26% of our students weren't passing, and that represents a potential loss to the nursing profession and to the communities that they would have served. The mean mark was 58%. So as I said earlier, that's hardly admirable. So something needed to be done. And when we broke that down, so I looked at the student data and their self-identified ethnicity. Where they identified more than one ethnicity, I've grouped them based on the first ethnicity that they identified, just for simplicity of processing those numbers. And what we saw that was, while the whole cohort had a pass rate of 74%, and our non-Māori, non-Pacific students had a pass rate of 79%, our Māori and Pacific students had lower pass rates of 58 and 59%. So there's a discrepancy there. This is something that's often acknowledged, and we decided it was time to try and improve things for everybody and hopefully reduce that discrepancy. So you can see there that, there's a difference between the pass rates for our different groups. So one of the other things that happened at that time was there was an availability of new technology. So ADI introduced our teachers, our kaiako, to LT, and that allowed us to author practical, visually appealing lessons, allowed us to create a variety of different learning activities and questions to promote active learning rather than passive learning. So to ask and require the students to be actively involved in making connections and solving problems rather than just receiving information, as well as the ready-made bank of lessons and clinical case studies. The new approaches to education that we became aware of around this time, and I'm sure many of you are aware of, included active learning, student-centered learning, blended learning, and a flipped classroom approach, with blended learning being where course content and resources are available both face-to-face and online, and flipped classroom, in our case, we were asking students to complete activities at home before coming in, and active learning, we were asking the students to engage and discuss, question and apply. We also wanted to maximize the diversity of delivery rather than just chalk and talk. So this also changed the way that we delivered. So prior to 2017, as I said, we had a 2-hour lecture followed by a 2-hour lab and 1-hour homework. And then between 2017 and 2020, we flipped it. We were requiring students to complete work before class. So we authored all of these lessons ourselves. Then they came to a lab or a tute. And then there was what we called a lectorial at the time, which was kind of like a combination between a lecture and a tutorial. What that looks like now, and since COVID, is that we still ask them to do a pre-learning lesson. They then come to a tute each week. There may be a lab, so we've got, I think, probably 4 or 5 labs per semester, and then there's extra questions that they can do in Kura Cloud after class if they'd like to. So this is just showing an example of what Kura Cloud can look like, or LT can look like compared to slides. This is an example of a slide about inflammation that we were using prior to 2017. And then this is what we transformed that into. So again, talking about inflammation, where the students are asked to think about what causes inflammation and what that process looks like. Here's a diagram from a textbook showing that inflammation process. But what we can do with this is add an audio. So this is me doing a description, so talking the students through this process here and hopefully making it easier to understand for people who learn through hearing as well as those who learn through seeing. And then what we would ask them to do is then put that together, synthesize it. So to put that process together and think about how one thing relates to another. So for example, when there's tissue injury, there are inflammatory mediators released, which cause vasodilation, which increases blood flow to the area, which results in redness and heat, and so on. And then the students can also check their answers and find out whether they're on the right track or not. So there's feedback being given as they're learning, so that they can adjust their track if they're not on the right track, and they know that they're doing well if they are. So we moved from lecture theatres into tutorial rooms, and that allowed us to get alongside the students and address individual questions and those of small groups rather than dealing with a large group at any one time. And then to try and apply the theory to clinical experience. So if somebody came in with an inflammatory condition, this is what they would see, and then work backwards to the physiology, and then ask them to put in their own words what causes the redness and heat associated with inflammation. So it's just asking students at every point to think about what they understand and to make connections between concepts. We wanted to know whether what the changes that we'd made had made any difference to academic results. So this is what we saw initially. So 2016 was before we made changes. That's our traditional delivery. These are the mean marks we're looking at here rather than the pass rates that you saw earlier. I'll show you the pass rates soon. So you can see our Māori students had a mean mark of 55%, Pacific of 51%, and our non-Māori non-Pacific at 59%. And you can see that over the following years, those numbers have lifted. Now, if we look at our non-Māori non-Pacific students, we're dealing with a large number. So from 180, 218, 147, 137, it's hard to lift mean marks with that number of students. So this is a significant increase in mean mark across that period of time, and it was a sustained increase in mean mark. It also resulted in a decreased discrepancy between our Māori Pacific and our non-Māori non-Pacific students. This is where the magic happens down here. These are our pass rates. So you saw those pass rates earlier in 2016. But look at what happens in 2017. There's a massive jump for all of those groups, particularly our Māori and Pacific students. Our Pacific students, we have a small number. So that number can fluctuate quite a bit depending on the number of students that we have. But this was particularly pleasing here. Bit of a drop down here, but on the whole, the trend is an increase in pass rates as well as mean marks. I'm showing you these years, 2016 to 2019, because this is all before COVID. So COVID changed the way that we had to present and also the way that we were assessing. So we were well set up to go into COVID because we had all of our content online already, but we had to change the way that we were assessing. So just in terms of numbers, between 2016 and 2019, you can see an increase in mean mark from 58% to 65% and an increase in pass rate from 74 to 86%. Okay, so what happened after COVID? Well, those were some years. They were difficult for a lot of people. And I guess the question is, were those changes maintained? And the answer is yes, taking into consideration also and acknowledging that conditions were different. So, for example, students weren't able to be assessed on campus under supervision. They were being assessed at home and difficult to supervise, hence the slightly raised marks here. I think some people taking advantage of those conditions and then us adjusting to that here. And then what you can see down here is under the influence of Te Pūkenga policy, more resets were offered in 2023. So students were allowed to reset each assessment once if they would like to. And so we've got slightly raised marks here. Okay, so that was our mean marks, so still better than 2016. We look at those in terms of numbers, you can see 58% in 2016, 65 in 2019, and 66 in 2023. So it's reasonably consistent. Still pleasing, still working reasonably well for most people. And then our pass rates also looking pretty good. So you can see here 74% in 2016 through to 94 in 2023 for the whole cohort. And then what's particularly exciting is our Māori ākonga here from 58% pass rate to 96 in 2023. So that was something to be celebrated. Right, in terms of laboratory classes, we use our labs and Kura Cloud in our health science labs. Some of the things that we do with this is it allows the students to take photos of their experiments. So here we've got all their experiences. Here we've got a lung dissection, and this person has decided to take a photo of the lung dissection. They can upload it into LT so that they've got a record for later. Or if we're using the microscope, they can take photos of their own cheek cells and annotate them if they'd like to. Down here, this student has done a drawing of some of the blood cells that they've seen and labelled it. So LT facilitates all of that. And one of the features that I really enjoy is their ability to to take biological readings or measurements and then put them into a table. So here we're looking at a blood glucose experiment where we've got volunteers who haven't eaten for 2 hours before class, or they can drink water. And then we take their blood glucose sample, their blood glucose measurement, and then we give them either jelly or rice. And it's the same amount of carbohydrate, but in 2 different forms. And so we get a change in blood glucose. And when we link the table to the graph, this graph is produced in real time. So the students are able to do something to themselves, record the changes, and then look at the pattern that occurs. So it's real-time experiential learning. And then that's the start of a discussion about the explanation for the differences in those changes. Using Power Lab, we will do recordings like the ankle jerk reflex. This is where you're tapping using the tendon hammer to tap on the person's Achilles, and then these electrodes here are recording contraction of the muscle. So that way we get a difference in time between when the hammer hit, when the muscle contracted, and then we can measure the distance from the ankle up to the sacrum and then back down to the muscle, and we get a distance, and that allows them to calculate induction velocity. So the students really enjoy that experiment. And Deepika showed you the LT sensors that plug straight into people's laptop, reducing the need for the old Power Labs. Very handy. We're not working with them yet, but we'd like to. And just in summary, so we've been using LT or Kura Cloud since 2017. It's used in 23 bioscience and clinical courses across nursing, midwifery, physiotherapy programs. We have over 900 students currently using it. The ADI developed lessons are high quality and cover a range of subjects. They're interactive and engaging, and they promote active learning. They're easy to create and edit. They're fun to create and edit. And in terms of quantitative data, they've resulted in increased pass rates and mean marks in our Year 1 bioscience courses. And that's for all groups we looked at, our priority learners, our Māori and Pacific learners, and our non-Māori, non-Pacific learners. And I thought I'd let our students, our ākunga, have the last word. So when we asked our students about their experience, and this is our Māori and Pacific students from, these are the ones from semester A 2023, what they told us was that LT or Kura Cloud is far more consistent and user-friendly than Moodle. That's our other platform. It allowed for more effective labelling and included supportive imagery. It was a less stressful platform to work in. It facilitated improved grades and increased accessibility. It was well presented, easy to navigate. And this is an important one for a lot of our students. It allows those that are time poor to fit learning in at home around the demands of family and work. This is huge for us. We have students that have got young families. They need to work to support their families. And this means that they've got access to the learning resources when they're at home. And they can do it at a time that suits them. They're not bound by class times. And if they have to miss class, they don't entirely miss the learning. It's easy to take notes from. It's essential and effective learning tool. It's fun, interactive, well organised, and allows them to draw while learning and supports retention through repeated formative assessments, and allows ākunga to work easily in groups and share their understanding. So that's another point, actually. It allows them to log in as a group so that if one person's absent, they still get the notes. And it provides repetition and opportunities to practice answering questions. I hope you found that interesting. If you've got any questions later, I'll be happy to answer them, but I'll pass you over to Kimberly next.
Oh, kia ora. My name's Kimberly Smith, and I teach similar courses to Ricci down here at Otago Polytechnic in Dunedin, New Zealand. That was great, Ricci. I don't know how much I can add to that because you've covered all of the really kind of key points. So I don't have a deep dive into all of the statistics like Ricci had, but I can say that our statistics did have mirrored that somewhat. There's a few variations here. When I came to teach courses in midwifery and nursing and the science courses at Polytech, they had just recently transitioned from that traditional lecture and then tutorial or lab sort of setup to what was being called then, so this was 2011, 12, 13 was what was being called blended learning. And what had kind of happened, or what I should say, what I inherited when I came into the courses was that previous lecturers had just taken their PowerPoints, put them online in Moodle for students, and then had just kind of a shorter tutorial class period. So that's kind of what I had to work with when I came in. In those first few years, we didn't have LT yet, hadn't been developed. So, I was just mucking around with lots of different ways of trying to create online material in a way that hopefully in a way that tried to help students with their learning, but it wasn't working very well. And then 80 Instruments came, onto the scene and introduced us to what was at that stage their lab tutor and Power Lab kind of platform thing. And so I started developing courses within that and then transitioned to LT the next year. So I thought what I would do is just kind of show you some of the LT lessons and things that we have and how we use it here at Otago Polytechnic. So I have a lot of courses that I run this through, and basically any course that I have touched at Otago Polytechnic, I've put into LT. So I started out in midwifery and then developed midwifery and nursing year 1 anatomy and physiology papers. And then I picked up like a beauty therapy course, and I automatically went straight to LT. I said, right, I can take your material and I can put it in LT. When I picked up the pathophysiology course in year 2, there was a little bit in there, but it was still relying on old PowerPoints as the main delivery method. And I went, yeah, now LT. So I pretty much, like, that's how much I've enjoyed using LT and working with it, is that if I've picked up a new course that has not used LT before, I am putting content into LT. So I'm just going to go in and show you just an example of how I've used LT to develop lessons in first anatomy and physiology and then in our pathophysiology courses. So it's organized really well. Students go in, they find their course. You can block lessons into groups. So I've got 3 modules, for instance, and each of those have 6 lessons in them. And that's I align that with our assessment. So we have 3 exams that cover each of these modules, 6 lessons type of thing. So you can organize it how it suits in terms of how you run the course. I think that's the greatest thing about LT, is that it is fully customizable and it's super easy to do that customization. So you can group lessons and labs and things together however you want or not, and kind of make it work for how your course delivery is going to be. With anatomy and physiology, it works really well. So I can create different lessons on the different topics and go in. And so as Ricci's presentation showed, that kind of showed the layout. And obviously everyone can do it differently, but yeah, so when LT first came on board, there weren't a lot of pre-developed lessons and things from ADI yet. So it was very much a matter of going, okay, I've got these old worksheets and PowerPoints and, bits and bobs here. How do I take that and put it into an LT lesson? So it certainly was a lot of work, initially when you had all of that kind of scrappy stuff. But it was just basically blank sheet, and I could just input whatever I wanted into the lesson. And my approach, much like Ricci's, has been, to move away from that kind of, lecture-y type of thing and actually have something interactive and pre-work. So the idea was that LT was mostly how students were getting their content and then coming to a small class. So still to this day, so we didn't have labs when I started. Like, labs had been removed as part of kind of some sort of changing, and I haven't gotten labs back, and we don't have adequate lab space here. So we don't have like the power labs or the sensors at this stage. I, basically had like 1 hour face-to-face time with students each week to cover all of this stuff. I've progressively grown that, and that has changed. But the main bulk of how students were getting their content was on LT. So it had to be more interactive. It had to be something that they could go through and then come to class and get a little bit more clarification, explanation, and then go back to the lessons. And that's pretty much how we currently use LT in our science courses here in nursing. So I try to take all the content, put it into these lessons, learning objectives for them. And my approach is a combination of, let's give them some information that they need to know. Let's also see what they might already know. So I just doctor all of my lesson pages with a bit of information and then with questions and activities for them to do. Telling students that you don't have to know the answers if this is the first time you're encountering this, but you might be surprised at what you know and understand or how much you get. And then you can build your knowledge from your own existing, knowledge base. Then you can grow and build your knowledge and understanding from there. So lots of kind of information, images, questions, and things like that. Videos that you can pop in from reference sources. Again, like here's matching drag and drop type of stuff. You can click on things and it'll pull up extra drop boxes and pop-up boxes and things like that. And then I put in mini quizzes all throughout. So they'll have so many pages to work through some stuff, and then they'll have kind of little quiz pages to allow them to kind of go test how well they've understood what they've just worked through. And so I'll have a variety of things there. And one of the things that I've found really useful about this ability to really easily mix written content or spoken content, as Ricci said, you can put in audio files as well to explain stuff, and your pictorial content. Now you can add videos, and you can do these interactive activities, getting the students to think about what they've just looked at or read, or what do they already know about something, and then build on from there. Popping those in is just so easy to mix and match them all anywhere, all over the page. So that's been really good. And I've ensured that the great advantage of that is that I basically build in assessment, like what the assessment will be for students. I've built in practicing for that assessment into the lessons. So a lot of every year, students always ask, oh, can I get access to the practice quizzes or practice exams or previous year's exams, to help me prepare for the assessments? And I'm like, it's there. I said, if you work through the questions and activities in your LT lessons, you will be doing practice questions. And in fact, some of your actual questions mostly are actually, in here. So for instance, I've got this question here, describe the steps of protein synthesis. It's one that they can just do. This is formative for them. They get immediate feedback if they type in some sort of answer. They can check, they get feedback of a model answer. That's a question in the exam. It's one of our learning objectives that they need to, kind of know and understand the steps of that process. And so it's been really great that I don't have to use multiple different things everything is in here and integrated kind of, into one area where they can use it. And that is what students feedback. So very much like Ricci presented, since the introduction of LT into my courses, I have had nothing but good feedback from students about it. I can't even think, I do not recall a single negative comment about LT as a platform and as presenting what's in there. I mean, sure, students might say things like, oh, I find the content, it's a bit, very complex for me and difficult to understand. That's what I put in, and I can work on what I put in. But in terms of the actual functionality and usability and the way that using LT helps them to prepare for classes and prepare for assessments, that has been nothing but positive feedback. So, I'm just going to, hold on, I just need to move one thing on my screen to get back out here, come back out. So that was just kind of a mini example of it in our general anatomy and physiology course. So we're just covering, basic normal anatomy and physiology of human adults. And then another course that I teach into, this is our pathophysiology course. And this combines pathophysiology and pharmacology. And again, we can block everything up however we want to. We have a set of teaching weeks throughout the year, 3 weeks, and then another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, and then a final week. So we block everything up in relation to that. But the big thing here is using the case studies that ADI have developed. So in this particular year, so this year's course, we used 4 different case studies. So a COPD, myocardial infarction, type 2 diabetes, and stroke. And so I'll just go into one of the case studies. So we've got Mike, who had a myocardial infarction. And so these are what Deepika was talking about in terms of the actual patients. So these are real people. Most of them were originally at least based in Dunedin. I remember when ADI were doing these films and they were making them. It was really big, you know, when we started working with this platform, that they were like, oh, we're doing these things and we're filming these people. So for me, these are local local patients, and so, you know, they've got various things. I've adapted the lessons again to be specific to what we're covering in the course, but all of like the videos and the information is specific to the patient. So we do things like we're introduced to our patient. Mike here tells us, so he was recorded telling us about, you know, his experience with having chest pain. His partner here describes what was happening. Students can take their own notes on what they've observed. And then we just go through various things like, you know, risk factors. I'm linking this back to a previous LT lesson and lecture that was just covering myocardial infarction generically. So just covering it as a pathophysiology topic. And then now we're looking specifically, so I'm able to bring things from previous lessons into the case study here to integrate, to remind them, remember we covered, you know, what risk factors are. And now let's listen to Mike talk about his history, what things, you know, are you picking up that are from, you know, what you know are risk factors, signs and symptoms, and pathophysiology and so on. So, you know, we've got patient information and data from reports, and then I can ask the students questions, and again, throw things in and link it all back to Mike's experiences as well. So as students work through. And then this is a large assessment for students at the end of their pathophysiology course. So here's Mike's ECG readings that they can look at. Evaluations of, you know, his blood tests. We've got reports. So what were Mike's, you know, blood test results here, other test results that are in there. Again, just multiple things. I mean, these patient libraries are massive. There's so much in there. And so I actually haven't even used all of the information for this particular patient because we're just not covering in that level of detail at this stage of the program some of those aspects. So we can pick and choose. So this is in our second year pathophysiology and pharmacology course, but actually even in the first year, they use some aspects of these patient files. And then in other years, they'll use even more aspects of these patient files in courses. And it's really great. The students really like obviously being able to move from that theoretical application to a bit more practical application, even though this is still a full theory course for us, but it's linking to their practical courses in nursing, and it's giving them a chance to really start to kind of go, okay, here's how my pathophysiology, pharmacology theory is really starting to link to an actual person that exists, and drugs and things here. So mostly in nursing, we do use the LT platform in the science courses, but we have spread the clinical courses tend to use it. So often students will work through LT lessons before they have to come to lab. So they'll be introduced to the skills that they're going to do in a lab. In an LT lesson, there might be some videos in there of, you know, people demonstrating those skills, and then they'll come to lab and then they'll learn and demonstrate and do those skills, you know, and they're supposed to read through and things like that. And for our part here at OP, and currently how the courses that I'm running in nursing are taught, with not having that lab kind of component that it had traditionally existed sometime before I came here, and not being able to necessarily have the facilities here to get back into like wet labs and dissection and things like that. But what now we have the potential to do is use those LT sensors in the AMP courses particularly. And I would really love to do that. It's a funding issue, obviously, at the moment, of whether or not we can get the funds to get enough sensors for the number of students that we have and how we run the classes. So that is sitting out there in the ether to be sorted out. But from previous experience, so I did also use the Power Lab setup at the University of Otago when I was teaching in first year health science courses there, anatomy and physiology papers, and I absolutely loved it. So we had labs where students did physiological measurements on themselves using that Power Lab equipment. And so I know that I can integrate that well into my existing anatomy and physiology courses if we can convince the powers that be here to get the funding to get those sensors. So that would be an absolute added bonus to what is already working as a really great platform for our students. And yeah, the big thing, again, finishing up, like Ricci said, feedback is just phenomenal every year. I've not had any negative feedback about the platform use from students. They all love LT. They do tell me every year, I get students tell me, you know, it actually works really well if I do read the LT lessons before I come to class. And you go, I know, right? That's why I say to do that. And then they're like, and then I can go back and study it. And exactly, they're there all the time. You know, so again, we've got lots of students as well with, you know, various, you know, situations outside of their studies, families and things like that. And so, you know, you can see that students are working late into the night for some of them, and others, you know, can put it here and before and after work, or if they've got, slow periods at work, you know, some are able to just, hey, I can go on and I can revise this topic. And that's fabulous. And staff as well. So because I started with LT, I've kind of been the guru that people come to whenever, you know, that they pick up a new course and new staff. And it's amazing how little time I actually have to spend with like new staff, getting them to use LT, because it is so user friendly that more questions are about like, oh, so can you give me access to a course? Like, it's kind of background stuff that I'm more likely to do. And mostly new staff come in and, you know, they see this LT thing and they look through it. And once they've got access to start developing themselves, they're off and away. And I don't even get really questions because it's so easy to use and set up and put things together. So yeah, hopefully that's just added a bit to what Ricci has said. But yeah, thank you. And yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ricci and Kimberly. That was a really good presentation from both of you. I'm hoping the audience got more insight on how nursing start at both Otago Polytechnic and Wintec. So we do have a few questions that have come in. And thanks, Ricci, for answering them, but I would still get those questions to the forefront so the other attendees gain some insight onto that as well. So one of the questions was, do students use group login facility in tutorial classes? So Ricci, you mentioned it's a helpful feature. Is there anything else you wanted to add on?
Yeah, so we often have students, so we have our pre-learning set up as individual work, and then our tutorials and our lab classes set up as groups. And so we often we'll have groups of between 2 and maybe 8 logging in together. And that means that particularly if a person, so they can share their answers, they can discuss it, have one person writing the answers in, and they all get those answers. Or if somebody's absent, it means that they don't miss out on the learning. So the students really like the group login function. Yeah, it's been really useful. And once they discover that it's there, they use it often.
Thanks, Ricci. And there was also a question of about how do you link LT to curriculum in your LMS to ensure that students engage the right lessons? And the question's open to both Kimberly and Ricci. So
we have a link in our LMS, which is Moodle, that the students can click on, and it takes them straight to LT. We don't use our LMS Moodle for any content at all except for assessments. Yeah, so all of our content, pretty much without exception, is in LT. Yeah. Yeah, if that answers the question. Kimberly, have you got anything to add?
You know, ours is similar. So, I mean, we still use Moodle, and we just have a link. I put a link in my Moodle course to LT, but all of the content's in LT. I do have other practice quizzes in Moodle, and then our actual summative assessments are also in Moodle. But yeah, we do the same thing. We put a schedule and a timetable of what topics we're covering when, to give students an idea of when they should be working on each of their LT lessons. And then they've got the link there, and most students just flag, you know, mark LT, bookmark it as you know, one of their tabs, and just go to it however.
And
thanks.
just as an aside, there's a fabulous function in LT where you can see which students have been working in LT and what their progress is. And it means that you can easily get a list of students that haven't opened a lesson and send them a curiosity email. Notice that you haven't been doing this particular work. Is everything okay? Translation, come on, hurry up, you need to get your work done. Or if there's genuinely something getting in their way, then they've got the opportunity to respond and explain why. It's very useful to be able to see who's doing what, when, and how things are progressing.
Yeah, and you can look at specific student lessons. So sometimes I'll find, even if it looks like your students have started a lesson, but maybe, you know, they're struggling with something. So I can go in and actually look at, and, you know, often I'll find, okay, they're not answering the questions, or they're answering the questions and activities quite poorly, like they don't have an understanding, you know, so I can determine sometimes whether it's a matter of them not actually doing the work or just not understanding the work as well. And that's really helpful, especially with students who start to struggle and are on that kind of borderline of, are they going to pass? Are they going to fail?
Or are they grabbing the questions, putting them to AI, and then putting them into the answers?
Just to add on the LMS, it's from my end as the support person. So LT can be easily integrated with LMS. We have really good guides on how you can integrate them with Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, Brightspace, etc. So if anyone's interested, it's easy thing, and you can reach out to us if you want the guides as well. So another question is for Ricci. Why do you think LT engages Maori and Pacific populations more effectively, resulting in improvements in pass rates?
I can give you my opinion and feedback from students. I don't pretend to be an expert or know the minds of all people, remembering that, that just because someone's a part of a particular ethnic group doesn't mean that they conform to a particular way of doing things. But I think what LT does offer is greater flexibility. It means that students have more flexibility about when they learn. So, for example, if they're busy with children or work, and the only time they have to learn is late at night, or if they're out on clinical placement and they happen to have a break, they can learn then. I think that it's more hands-on and it allows us to add more variety. So we are tapping into people who like to see things, people who like to do things, people who like to hear things, people who like to watch a video, rather than just relying on reading alone or just listening to a lecture. I think variety is going to be useful no matter which group of people you're talking about.
Thank you. The next question I would like to extend to both of you. You did mention students were taking advantage of the remote working conditions in 2020 during COVID, and then later things changed. So how did you make sure no misconduct was occurring there?
During assessments?
Yeah.
I think whenever you're doing an assessment, your goal is to ensure that you can say this particular person has gained this particular level of knowledge on this particular subject. And if an assessment can't meet those, then it's not an ideal assessment. In COVID, we were working under difficult conditions, and we didn't have any options other than to assess people in the locations that they were, if they were wanting to continue with the course. What we found in 2020 was that our marks went up by about 5%, even if we were looking at the same questions. So that means that a subset of our students were being resourceful and potentially Googling questions. So the way that we responded to that was to make our questions less Googleable. So we'd take our questions, put them into Google, see whether an answer came back quickly or not. And if it came back quickly, then we needed to change the structure of the question. So one of the ways that we did that was to make the questions more visual. So, for example, instead of saying what is the function of the retina, we would have a picture of the eye, an arrow to the retina, and say which of these options best describes the function of structure A. So you can't grab that question, what is the function of structure A, put it into Google and get an answer. So that was our, what's the word? Anyway, just trying to evolve with what was going on there. Yeah, so our marks did drop a little bit in 2021. We made the questions a little bit different. I'm pleased that we did. And what we do now with our physio students who are sometimes assessed at distance is we have Zoom on them during the test. But yeah, I think anytime you don't actually have the people in the room, there's a risk that somebody's going to be cheating. Even if you do have them in the room, there's a risk somebody's going to be cheating. So yeah, it's an arms race is what I was going to say. Yeah, we do our best.
Kimberly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so we had the same thing. 2020 results were certainly higher. And yeah, in 2021, with the schedule that we had, even though COVID stuff was still going on, we still managed to get students back into the classroom. So they do online assessments, but we book computer rooms that we have invigilated for student assessments. Though even as Ricci just said, even in a room with an invigilator, students are still able to find ways, and we have discovered that happening. One of the other things we've started doing is, though, Ricci, I like your idea of actually putting your questions in and seeing what comes up, because I often do that, because often there'll be a student answer and I think, well, that's a bit strange. It's not how we covered it, and I'll Google it and go, oh, yeah, that's where they've gotten it. So that's a really good idea. We've also, because with online exams, and even if students are in an invigilated room, they'll quickly pull up another tab, they'll go into their LT lessons or, things like that. So we, one of the features in LT is that you can basically close off or the lessons so that students can't access them. So we've started doing that as an extra thing as well, so that just in a moment, if they feel like, the invigilator's not got their eyes on them, they're not pulling up a tab and going into their LT lessons and actually finding, the exact, model answer or whatever in there. So we do kind of temporarily close their access to their LT lessons off just at the time of just during the time of the assessment. And when the assessment time is done, we can make those available to them again. So that's another cool feature of that, since they're sitting assessments within Moodle instead of LT. And yeah, so we were fortunate that we got back into kind of invigilated on-campus assessments, and we don't currently have any programs, or, well, I'm not currently involved in nursing. We don't have any assessments that sit remotely. So we've been fortunate that after 2020, we were able to kind of get back to that little bit more tightening.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Ricci, especially because it's really late for you out there. You're sitting there working till 5 and helping us out with this. And especially I love to see the presentation and hear the student feedback, because that's what makes us happy that something good's happening out here. So thanks again for presenting. And yeah, that's about it. And the audience, if you have any questions for us from either sales or support point of view, just reach out to either my colleague Parimal or me, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thanks again.